I've simplified my Mac terminal setup, and in the description of this YouTube video, I'll have the link to this right here. And from this, it's very simple. You install one of the agents, either Claude Code or Codex CLI, and you run one of those agents, and then you paste this into one of those agents, and it should basically set up everything for you. And the rest of the video, I'll just be going through that in detail, what things are, how I use it. And so you don't need to follow along if none of that interests you. You can just follow the easy steps and then you should be good to go. So you might be wondering, why would I use a terminal instead of a IDE or one of the desktop apps? And using the terminal will allow you to use all the models in one place, all the providers in one place. You can get better performance because it's working directly in the command line, which is where you'll be running a lot of the commands directly anyways. And so there won't be another layer on top of it. Even though it might feel like you're learning a new language, once you've picked up some of the basics, you'll prepare yourself for changes that one of these providers might make to any of the applications. As you probably have seen recently, ChatGPT have switched their apps a few times, moving from the ChatGPT desktop app to the Codex desktop app. They're switching how chat interface works with the code interface, and the same thing with cowork. And because there's a additional layer of application on top of it, oftentimes there are probably more system prompts, more experimentation going on. And so you'll be able to bypass a lot of it, not all of it, and get down to as close to the model as you can. Originally, I used an IDE and I just kept coming back into the terminal within the IDE. And so I was like, why am I still in the IDE? Why not just go directly into the terminal? And so then I started to use it more, and then I found that you could pretty much do everything in the same exact way. And as you'll see here, you can open up many tabs and many side panels, and then you can run as many agents as you want in each one of these things. And it'll just give you a lot more flexibility with multi-agent setups. And so let's say you run out of tokens, credits with one, you can switch really easily to the other one and not stop any of the work that you've been doing. Here you'll have the terminal, which you can enter in either agent to install it. I'm actually going to use a different terminal app because it's faster and easier to use. And in step 3, the agent will already install this for you, which is going to be Ghostty. But for this purpose of this, I'll just link this here in case you want to go directly here and copy the exact same path. Download the universal binary, or if you're on a different machine, you can also follow this, but it might not follow exactly like the video. And then once we do that, I'll close out this window here and I'll close out terminal. We'll end up in this screen here. And I've already installed Claude Code and Codex, but you'll see here, you can just copy this in and you'll paste that in. I'm gonna set up some new agents to run at the same time. And so you can use the shortcuts Command D to open up a new surface or panel on the right side, and then Command Shift D to open up another panel on right below it. And then here I can now run a few terminal commands at the same time. And so here you'll see I've installed Claude Code again, and I've also installed Codex again. And now I'm actually going to add in an additional one, and this will be useful for future videos. And I'll talk about why this might be useful in a little bit, but you can also install Pi. I use Pi quite a bit. I use all 3 harnesses for different reasons, and you'll see right here. So you'll have Claude Code here, Codex here, and then Pi here. And then now, for the purpose of this, because we've installed this, we can start any one of these agents. I'm going to start Claude Code here. I'm going to start Codex here, and then I'll start Pi here. And for your purposes, you might just need to do one. You might only have one subscription, whether that be Anthropic's Claude or OpenAI's Codex or ChatGPT. And Pi will just let you use that across any model, not just Claude or Codex, but I use it primarily with Codex through the subscription because you can integrate it very easily. I don't believe you can do that easily with Claude Code. Claude Code requires you to use it within their own ecosystem. So now that we have all 3 harnesses going on, I'm going to paste this exact same thing that we have over here into one of the windows. And so Claude Code will check through all these different things and then install that for me. You can put it into Codex, you can put it into Pi. And so after we've pasted this in, we'll wait for Claude Code to finish, and it'll check and see what we already have, what we want to modify, remove, add, change. And I've already had a lot of this set up already, such as Homebrew, but on a new machine, Claude Code or Codex should be able to resolve a lot of the conflicts that you might see, and then set it up in a way that you can work. And at the end, it'll summarize everything for you. And if you have specific questions on how to use specific things, then it should be able to explain that. But there's a few things that I might want to talk about first. And the first thing is, once you set this up, you either need to run this in a new screen or in the same screen, or open up a new terminal. And so opening up a new terminal is as simple as just doing Command T. Now we'll have this cleaner UI, and we can pretty much exit out of any one of these. And so you can exit out of it using Control C, and you'll notice that we'll have this not so pretty UI, and you can run source to change it so that it picks up the new settings. And the same thing with any one of these, you'll be able to do that. Now that we're in Ghostty, we have some shortcuts that will make using this a lot easier. And so the first thing is Command W to close out a window. And so I can now close out all the windows, and I have this new tab here. And then let's go through that again, just so that it's kind of a little bit more muscle memory. Command D to open up a right panel, Command Shift D to open up a bottom panel from where we're at. And so then we'll be able to do that and have 4 different views. And then in here, you can start up now with the aliases that we set up, which is just a shortcut for us to be able to set up some of these things. When we set up that copy and paste prompt, we set out the model to be Opus. And so I think Opus is a great model to be your default. And you can set it up to bypass any permissions, and it'll be able to work autonomously without you having to approve everything. And we did the exact same thing with Codex with the YOLO mode. But the important thing here is, at least right now in July of 2026, I am only comfortable using 5.5. And when you do /model, you can choose the model, and there's a newer model now with 5.6 Sol, and supposedly it's better. And I did a lot of testing, and I'm not sure if I could tell that big of a difference. And people talk about how there are some issues with the newer model where it might not be as safe to run in YOLO mode. And so I would still recommend maybe just sticking with 5.5, because it should be able to get you everything you need in the same way that you would use Opus in Claude Code. And I don't like to think about this very often, and so I just set extra high, and it's set it and forget it. I will use Codex for GPT 5.5 extra high. I'll use Claude Code with Opus 4.8. I will sometimes use 4.6, and that's why we have that other alias we set up as CC6. It'll make it easier for me to go back to the older model, which I find sometimes easier and quicker, where it doesn't overthink as much. But I have found that Opus 4.8 for much more complex tasks, it will perform better. And then if you're on a lower plan, like the $20 plan, if you're worried about running out of credits earlier, 4.6 does use less tokens because it's less verbose. And so another thing that you can consider, but I like to not have to think about these things. And so maybe just using CC, Claude Code, Opus 4.8, that will be sufficient for you. My actual daily driver now, because I am using the Claude Code Max plan, the $200 plan, so I have a lot more credits, and I'll actually use Fable until I run out. I find Fable a lot easier to work with, and that's my main driver. But even with that, because I run out of credits much faster, I'll switch over to my OpenAI subscription with Codex, and I will use that with GPT 5.5 extra high. And then here, this is probably not super important, but I'll talk about why you might be interested in using Pi. If not, you can kind of skip this section of the YouTube video and go into a future section, which is Pi is a minimal harness and agent, and it doesn't have as many of the additional tools and prompts. So it's a little bit more bare bones, and sometimes that can make it perform better if you don't need all of the extra functionality, such as there is like the goal functionality where you can set a goal for a long running task. And for most use cases, you might not need that. And so using Pi with Codex 5.5 extra high might be everything you need. The only issue is oftentimes Pi doesn't have search baked in, and so you do have to implement that or switch harnesses. But one of the advantages of using all three models or harnesses, it allows you to be on the frontier and test new models as they come out, as well as not be vendor locked in. Let's say your company switches models, providers, and you have to relearn a whole new harness. If you only wanted to get one plan for $20, I would recommend the Claude Pro, and then just use Opus until you run out. If you're using an older model like Sonnet, I find you have to do a lot more work to get not as great results, and it just makes using agents not as fun or easy, and you end up debugging a lot more. It kind of brings you back to 2025. And if you want to get similar levels of performance like Opus, but it lasts longer, so you're more price sensitive, then I actually do find GPT lasting much longer, and you'll still get to the same results, but maybe it takes a little bit longer. But I think the best of both worlds, if you start to use agents a lot and you are somewhat price sensitive, using $20 Claude, $20 ChatGPT, and you can use that all in the terminal, and you should be able to get everything you need done. And you'll also make it so that you know how to use both, be on the frontier. When one provider is down, you can switch to another provider. And then one last note about Pi. One of the nice things about Pi is as you're using Pi, you'll be able to see a lot more of what is happening behind the scenes. So you can see images, how it thinks, what is it calling on. And there is no concept of sub agents in Pi unless you add it on as an extension. So it just gives you a lot more control, and sometimes it allows you to steer it much more easily because you can see exactly what's going on. And I think as you start to use it more, one of the things you'll learn is how to steer these agents. And that's a very useful skill because it won't always work exactly the way you want, but that's okay. It's all a lot of trial and error right now. And a lot of this is not obvious, but some of the aliases we set up will hopefully streamline a lot of that. And so with that, I'm gonna start up a new terminal window, as you'll see right here. And I'm currently in this work folder. And in this work folder, there are a few common things that will be equivalent of you in Finder. And so I set up some of the aliases already. And one of the aliases I set up was O. So O is basically an alias for open. So you could type in open, and then you can type in open dot, and it'll basically open up your finders. And so here you'll see the current finder of my files for this folder. And another really common thing that I do is I'll need to see what's in this folder. And so the command for that is ls, which is just list. And this is a very useful command because a lot of other tools that you'll use will have some form of list. And so here now you'll see in this folder, these are some previous videos that we had, and we talked about forecasts, attachments, daily, inbox, notes, projects, resources. And from this, I can now see my list of files in here. And then if you go back into the Finder, you'll see the exact same structure of that. So you can basically see everything really quickly. And oftentimes it's much faster to look for files in the terminal than it is to maybe kind of scan through all these things and see what they look like. And I set up some of the alias for that already. And the default list one doesn't have some of the clean UI. And so by setting up those alias, we just make it a little bit more easy to use, easy to see. And one of the common other ones that we have is LT, which is letting us look at the list of files in a tree structure. And so here now it's very easy for me to find something really quickly. And when I am in a particular folder, I can look at any of my files and folders and really quickly open some of those things. One of the common ones that I use quite a bit is CD. So CD is change directory. And so let's say I want to go into a different directory, different path, different folder. I'll do CD, and then I'll, let's say, go to R, which is I'm trying to go to resources, and I can basically type in resources, or I can also type in tab, which will autocomplete for that specific folder that I'm in. and then I'll click enter, and then now I'm in the resources, and then I can basically do the same thing, ls, and I'll see all the files there, or lt, and I'll see the tree structure there. And then in the same way, I'll do cd again to go into food, and then I'll be in this here now. But let's say another common thing that I want to do, and let's open this up now in the same way before, but I also set up another alias where I can also do OO. So now I can open it up really easily without having to type open dots. And here, I usually manually open that and create a new folder. Let's say I'm going to create this as Asian food. And then if I go back in here, I'll see that there. And so in the folder, I'll say or type mkdir. And then I'll be able to create a new folder. And so let's say European food. And then I can do ls, and I'll see that I have a new folder. And you'll see that there, mkdir, which is make a folder, or in this case, make a directory. And then we can walk into that directory, change the directory into European, tab. Now I'm in that, and I can do OO, and I'll open that up. And so now you'll see that you can navigate really quickly into some of these paths. And another common thing that I might do is in this European food directory, I am currently here, and I actually want to go back one folder. I'll do change directory, and I'll do ... and it'll bring me back one. But I also have an alias that makes it a little bit easier to do that. You just do ... and then you'll basically go back one folder structure. So now instead of being in food, I'm now in resources. Let's say I go ... again, I'll go back to work. I can now continue to go back and see my files really quickly without ever having to leave the terminal. And so another thing that I do often in the IDE is I look for specific file names. And so you can use find, and the alias for that here is FD that I set up. You can look up, let's say, YouTube. And so you'll find files that have YouTube, or let's say I see the files up there already. I can see Sagong. And so I'll look up that. But let's say you wanted to actually look up files that had specific words in there. And you can also use ripgrep. And these two tools, agents use a lot. So you can also just ask an agent and they'll do this on your behalf. But let's say you wanted to manually look it up for whatever reason. You can also use it, and then you'll be able to find here exactly, okay, here are all the files with that. And then the one last thing that I often look at, especially as projects get bigger, your second brain gets really big as well. I'm going to clear this up really quickly with Command K. So now we have that clean slate. I'll do LT again just to get a high level view of the structure. But let's say you don't want the structure and you want to quickly find something. Another shortcut that uses one of the other things that we found is if you type in Option C, this is going to be FZF, and it'll allow you to interactively search and choose for a list and see some of the other files in here. And so let's say I know that I want something with food. And so I'll look at here, food, and then I will be able to kind of search and find certain things of that. And I'll be able to find paths, etc. And then once I find that, let's say I want to go into the interactively go into it, click enter, and it'll bring me directly to that path. And so you'll see here, I can now go into that. So another one I have here is LL, which is just the detailed view. You can kind of see the dates, the time, have it shown where you also see some of the dot files that are hidden. So LA will show you the hidden files on top of the regular files, but in a different structure where you might not need all the additional details. And so then we went through again, LS, LL, LA, LT. Another thing that I use quite a bit as well is, let's say that I go to a specific folder or directory very often, and I don't want to have to type in the full path every single time. So as you see here, this is the path, right? And so let's say I copy this, and then I'll basically go backwards. I can go into that path by just putting the full path name. And so you'll see there, I'll go directly to that path. But let's say I go to certain projects quite a bit. Let's say that I usually go to resources and then food a lot. You can use another tool that we've installed and set up, which is called zoxide. And that just begins with a Z. You use Z in the same way as CD. It's just like smarter CD, smarter change directory. And if you entered in by itself, you would just go to the home directory. But let's say you now type in a name that you often go to. So there's some logic that captures the last few directories that you went to, so it can figure out which one you're trying to go to and bring you there. And that's just a quick way to go across projects really fast. And this is very useful as you have a lot of agents, a lot of different projects going on. And so let's say I just set up a lot of different agents. I'll do Claude Code, and then I'll do a Pi agent here. You'll see really quickly how changing directories, changing file paths will make it easy for you to get to the exact project that you want that has the context that you need to work on those projects. But this is kind of advanced stuff. So if you're just starting out, you can just keep this in mind, go back to this video later on. And another thing too, as you'll notice here, I'm exiting out of all these agents with Control C. It's a very common thing across all programs. And once you exit those programs, you can also clear out those surfaces or panels with Command W. And so we can kind of clean that up a little bit so we can get more to a clean state. And then again, Command K to get to a clean slate. We set up Yazi, which is YZ. And here you'll now be able to navigate the terminal in a more interactive way to basically go by folder structure, see specific thing. You can kind of go back and quickly view a lot of different things. So the terminal can do a lot of what you might do in IDE in a quicker, faster way. And this is great for maybe lightweight work. And then here, a common way to exit a lot of these terminal programs is Q, and you'll be able to exit that screen. So now that we went through a few common commands, there's a few other ones that I use quite a bit, but let's say we're in this folder and we'll go to the LT again. We'll see kind of the folders in here. And I wanted to really quickly create a file. Let's say I wanted to just create an empty text file. So I'll basically do touch.txt, and touch will just allow you to create an empty file. And the alias we set up before, we can also set that up as a shortcut. And so now if we do ls, you'll see that we have these two files, text and then test2. And another common thing that I use is I did Command K, so it clears out the window. And then let's go to the LT again. Once you create a file, you can also read into the file and see what it says using cat. So here I'm gonna cat this, but there's nothing in that file, so there's nothing to see. So let's actually add some text into that file. And you can use your editor of choice, but I'm gonna just go through this because we're doing a terminal kind of overview. Is you can use micro. So micro will allow you to basically get close to an editor view in the terminal. As you can see here, I'm gonna type something in, and then I'm gonna do Control to save, and then Control Q to exit. And so now you have a lightweight editor. Oftentimes, you'll still probably just edit everything either with an agent, Obsidian, let's say you're doing a markdown file, or your IDE of choice. I primarily use an IDE for quick code viewing. So I don't use it to edit code very much anymore. But if you just wanted to quickly live in the terminal, you can do that. And you can also create a new file from micro. And so we have a shortcut for micro using M. And so I'm going to have micro test3.txt. And then now we have this text3. And then I'll do the same thing. Control S, Control Q, and I'll exit that. And now we'll use the cat again. So cat test3. And now I'll see that in there. And so as you start creating markdown files, let's say that you do a T and you're going to do best food MD. And so now you'll create that file. There's going to not be anything in there. So we're going to do C best food, nothing in there. But let's say you're now going to edit that file. And since we're in markdown, we're going to just have some markdown food header and then some other markdown best food. And then we'll save that and quit. And now you can kind of see that there. And I'm going to just copy this in and do the cats again, which was C. And you'll be able to see that with that markdown format. And you might not remember all these commands, but over time, as you use them more, they'll become muscle memory. They're very useful. Let's say I'm gonna do Command D, and then I'm gonna do Command Space and look up CopyCat. This is just a program for us to paste into the terminal very easily. And when you install it, I've already had it installed here. It'll show up in your menu bar, but once you set it up and you don't want to see it or need it anymore, you can just turn that off so it'll run in the background. So let's say we're in Claude Code, and I use this a lot in my other videos. I will, let's say, screenshot this, and then I'll ask Claude Code. And you'll see here that you can now do Command C to paste that screenshot in here. So it's really easy for, what do you see? For you to give context to Claude Code, Codex, Pi, any harness. And without CopyCat in the terminal, you have to do Control C, which is not muscle memory. So you can also do that as well. So you'll see how a Control C will kind of show up like this. And then a Command V with CopyCat will give you this link. But the nice thing here is once you do that, sometimes I might actually want to have both Codex and Claude Code to answer a question. So then I can just copy and paste that in directly, and Codex will automatically parse that link. But let's say I also wanted to do a Pi. I can then also paste into Pi. What does this say? What does this say? And then here in all three agents, I can basically copy and paste prompts across all different agents, continue the work, see different response. If I'm planning across different agents and I want a second opinion or see how they might answer things differently, I can do that very easily, where I can just copy the entire thing. Versus if I'm copying this image 1, that doesn't translate. If I copy and paste, what does this say? And it won't be able to see that image because it's not an image, it's just text. But the way these two agents see it is that they see it within that terminal. And so here I'm gonna cancel this out, and I'll cancel this out as well. Command W, and then here you'll see that with Pi, you can kind of see how it's thinking, what it's reading, what tools and bash commands, which is just how they run the tools, what is happening. So you can kind of see the exact logic, which is quite useful sometimes, especially for steering an agent. And here, when I pasted this image 1, it's actually really interesting because I believe it was the exact same image as this one, but it read a different one. And then it had a different outcome, which is not correct. And so sometimes they make mistakes, even with the smartest models, as you'll see with Pi. And then I think that covers most of the common terminal commands. And especially in any of these agents as well, you can do the up arrow to go back and see what else you kind of had inputted. And same thing with this as well. You can kind of go up and down to go and see what you've entered in previously. And then you can easily rerun those commands. And then again, Control C twice to exit that out. You can resume your sessions with any of these agents. So we'll close out some of these windows, and Command K again to clear out this screen. So there's a whole nother set of, I'll go through a brief intro of that here, which is Git. We set up a lot of Git commands with aliases, but it's just a way for you to track your work and save your work. And the first thing to do is, like, let's say you have this folder and we have this tree of all of our files, but we now wanted to capture the state of it. As you can think about, if you're using Google Drive and you have a docs file, you actually want to save a specific state of that so you can change it and go back to one of those states in the past really easily. And as you're building out coding projects, that might be more useful. So you'll actually do git init. So that basically just allows you to set up a project with tracking. And so now we'll have, let's go back to the LL. You'll see that it now has this git.git file or directory, and it'll basically allow you to track your work. Now that we set this up, we can really quickly see what changes have been saved, have not been saved. And one of the last programs that I'll go very briefly into here is lazygit. If you use GitHub at all, or if this is your first time hearing about how to use GitHub, lazygit allows you just to see some of the things that you might see in the browser in your terminal. And so you'll use LG to get there, and then you'll be able to see a lot of some of the files that already exist in here. So you'll see that in this work folder, we have changes from the last date where we didn't save it, and we can save those files really easily. Let's say we want to save all these files. I set up an alias where we can just do GAA, and then here now we're going to save up all these files. We might not want to save all these files, but just for the purpose of this, I saved it all. And then you'll see that we're now tracking these files. And in a future video, I'll show you how to set up Git in a better way to track your files, because you might not want to track everything. But once you start tracking these files and saving these files and saving the state of that, you can go back to it at any point in time in the same way you might use Google Docs. You might still want to just use Obsidian for everything, but for a lot of people, it might just be using Obsidians to edit files, work with Claude Code or any agent for that. And so here you'll see that you can edit that directly here, or you can just use it as a viewer. And for the most part, I primarily just use Obsidian as a file viewer, still do a lot of the changes in the terminal with an agent. And hopefully this will now allow you to get a little bit understanding of how the terminal might be useful for you, how you might be able to use with multiple agents, that being Claude Code, Codex, or any one of these different windows. And in future videos, I'll kind of talk a little bit more in detail how to set it up so that you only have to configure it once and it works across different agents, different windows. But for many people who just want one agent, you can skip a lot of the additional things that I talked about and just focus on one. But if you did want to not have to shell out a full $100 a month on a specific plan, but still have a lot of headroom for agent work to manage your projects, your files, having both Claude Code and Codex might be beneficial to be on the frontier. They're highly subsidized right now. And I have a lot of other videos that kind of show you how you might use either one of those agents to accomplish work in a faster, better way. And the big takeaway for all of this is if you're ever confused or if you're unsure of what to do, you can always just ask one of the agents, Claude Code, Codex, Pi, and they will explain things to you, tell you how to use it, and it will make things faster.